password, just send them in the ID. There we go.
Okay, so we're going to get started again here. So the inner point of simple earnestness. So we're talking about tamimus. That is what we're talking about. Welcome back to everybody. I know it's been a few weeks since we spoke last. I did get this shiur started 5 minutes ago, but we had to reset, Baruch Hashem. So here we're back and jumping back into Bilvavi Mishkan Evna. The point I was making before we got cut off was the idea that ultimately we have a opportunity in our lives to connect to Yiddishkeit in a way that is simple and earnest, and we have an ability to find our avodas Hashem to be not only a checking of the box, but something that gives us this inner peace, this inner serenity. We spent a lot of time talking about that. The challenge with tamimus in general and being able to approach things with tamimus is you already have to be in a place of serenity before reaching that. And what makes it very difficult for people is that a lot of times, including myself, the initial reaction to anything in life that doesn't go the way that we want it is not tamim.
I'll leave in the waiting room.
It's not tamimus. So we're in a situation where we want to be able to connect to ourselves and our learning and our Yiddishkeit in a more meaningful way, and we don't want to have the negative reactions that we ultimately have as our first initial gut check. And for many of us, that's what it is. You know, we could be bothered by anything. You know, a text message, a phone call, a meeting, something at home, and it trickles down to our ruchnius. What Bilvavi Mishkan Evna is curing us with is telling us that our entire approach to life and focus area needs to be on the Eibishter. It needs to be on that connection, because from that place we will be full and we will be whole. But being able to devise a plan in which we can sustain that, being able to devise a plan in which we can truly connect to the different ways that we are so desperately trying to connect, with having all the other things in our lives that make noise, it's challenging, you know. And so I think one of the things to consider before we jump into the chapter is a lot of times we think of the tamimus and calmness and wholesomeness and different midos to be olam haza type things, meaning that we apply them in our working life, in our married life, in our friends, in our situations, in our paying of bills. What Bilvavi is going to talk about tonight is how we actually focus on our learning, how we actually focus on our tefillah. So many people feel that just by going and showing up, that's enough. And he calls a lot of that out and says that it's not just showing up, but it's how we show up. And training ourselves to be able to show up differently in the world. And I've had a very difficult time personally training myself to be able to sustain the level of tamimus that he talks about, both in my ruchnius and in my gashmius. And for the same reasons I just mentioned earlier, because ultimately it's very hard to feel whole and to be a wholesome human being when you're not ironclad in your bitachon and emunah. Because Bitachon and Emunah would tell us that if someone was holding in a very high level in Bitachon and Emunah, they wouldn't have any of the challenges of, this upsets me, this is an inconvenience, this person annoys me, nothing goes my way, I don't like blank, I wish it was this way, and that continual regurgitation of being able to find reasons as to why we are happy or not happy. And it continues to be fleeting, the ability to wholesomely connect to our ruchnius and our Yiddishkeit and the people around us, only because of one reason. It's the inability to connect deeply to Bitachon and Emunah. Now you'll say to me, yeah, but what if we're having a really hard time in life? I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying what's the truth, though, regardless of easy or hard, is that someone who has strength in Bitachon and Emunah in the worst of times, and we've learned this in times of the Holocaust, we've learned this in other pogroms, we've learned this in times of tremendous pain we've seen across what's happened in Eretz Yisrael the last few years, what's happened in tragedies that happened during the 9 days, and all over growing up. We see these things and we see people come out with such a level of Bitachon and Emunah, and that's what gets them through. So kal v'chomer, if you have a situation that is so dire and desperate, and Emunah and Bitachon is getting you through those situations, how much more so it should get us through the regular mundane day-to-day. But a lot of times it takes those insane situations to occur for that type of behavior to be triggered, and then it still falls off at some point down the line. So we can talk a lot about what happens when you have blank. What happens when you have tamimus? What happens when you have bitachon and emunah? But the challenge is, for balabatim, and I suspect Klei Kodesh as well, is, okay, but how do I hold on to it? How do I not just fall back into patterns? And we've talked about that. And that has to do with how often are you practicing changing the way of your thinking? How often are you taking time to talk to Hashem about it? How often are you learning how to meditate? How often are you learning how to silence the noise between your two ears? What are you reading to teach you how to get better at that? If we expect it to just occur, then we will all be in the same position 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I may have Esrim, until the day of our death. It will always be this fleeting, this I just can't reach that tamimos that he talks about. I just can't reach that peace and serenity, because at the end of the day I wasn't willing to put in the work to get there, thinking that there was the end goal. It's the how is the end goal. That's the only end goal we fully control. We only fully control the action steps that are fully physically in our power. That is all we can do. And I've given the example before on the Shiur. I've given it to in different business coaching engagements, which is you can judge salespeople on the end result goal, but the problem is they don't fully control that, so it's really not fair. So the executive will say, then what are you judging them on if it's not the results? You're judging them on the action steps it takes to get to the results, because as the manager, he should be able to draw up the equation as to what it will take in order to get the results that they seek. The avoda for us to reach some of the things that Bilvavi Mishkan Evna has talked about is being able to get to that quote-unquote inner point of tamimus. Is, are we willing to put in the practice of the behavior change that we want to see in order to get to the result that we want to feel? Are we doing the practice we need to get to the different types of levels we want to see, in order that downstroke effect is that we actually get to feel that? Because we're all chasing the feeling. That's all it is. We're all chasing the feeling. Sometimes it's a feeling of getting high, sometimes it's a feeling of getting low, sometimes it's a feeling of calm, sometimes it's a feeling of excitement, sometimes it's a feeling of spiritual connection, sometimes it's a feeling of inspiration, but we all want to feel good. The problem with feeling good is that we're all just after the feeling good, when the real thing we should be after is the small incremental steps that we need to take that compound over a year, 2 years, 3 years, that you start to see behavior change within certain people that is very, very, very different than what most people end up doing. Because if you look around at our parents and our parents' friends, most of them are still feeling much of the same way that they felt years ago. And in some ways not at all. In some ways they obviously are living these higher lives, and they have children and grandchildren, of course. But how many people do you see that make that uniform change, that complete 360, that allows them to be operating at a different level? You don't run into people. You may not run into people like that every quarter. When we see Gedalim, we get a taste. When we see Gedalim, we get a taste. So you'll say, I'm not going to be a Gadol. You're right. There are Balabatim who we also run into once in a while and also get to see a taste. The ones that are disconnected from Olam Hazanik type stuff because ultimately they've beaten the game. They're not still in the game. People who like to flex about the different things that they have or the different situations, or they get caught up in that world, and we're all guilty of it in some capacity. They're in the game. I'm in the game. I'm playing a game, and the ones who have lifted above that are looking down at the game, and in a way saying Nebuch, literally chasing something that we will never take to Olam Haba, and that is here for a limited time only. Okay. So let's jump into what he's going to talk about tonight, which is this inner panemius, this inner point of tamimus that we reach through this different interaction with our ruchnius. So page 70 in Bilvavi Mishkan Evna part 4, our focus and learning. We spoke in the previous chapter about tamimus, serving Hashem simply. We will now try to expand upon this topic and draw the concept closer to our hearts. When a person sits down to learn, usually his first thought is, please Hashem, give me the understanding in order to know Torah. But the truth is that this has to be the second thought that comes to mind, not the first. The first thought one needs to have is that when he's sitting down to learn Torah, because of this, it is the will of Hashem. And since Hashem wants one to understand the Torah, one tries to understand it. Hashem might want for a person that he shouldn't understand it. One should thus say it verbally and with a full heart that he's prepared to accept if he won't understand a thing. She's talking about such an incredibly high level. When we do things for others and we get recognized for doing that thing for others, it is always a better high than doing things for ourselves. So the underlying message here is, when we decide to do our ruchnias for the Eibishter, because that ultimately will come back to feeling better for ourselves, that is the higher level of reaching Tamimus in our Yiddishkeit. When we're putting Hashem first because it makes him happy, when we see our children's reaction when we surprise them with something nice or fun, when we compliment our children at the Shabbos table, especially the little guys and gals, and their face lights up at the recognition of their broken Devar Torah, or their song that is completely off tune, or their project that looks like some sort of modern art tragedy. And the reaction that they have is this wholesome, genuine, authentic, innocent joy and happiness, because we took time to recognize them. When we go out on our way for the guy who is down and out, and show up fully for him in the present moment, being able to listen to him and be there for him. When a Mashulach is coming to our house multiple times and we open the door and we welcome him in, and we truly, earnestly are listening to his cause. How often do we have an opportunity to do that, and how little do we take advantage of those opportunities? Because life is life and it's hard. So what Bilvavi here is saying is the ability to show up to our learning in a way that knowing that we're doing this to expand our dynamic relationship with Hashem, and he wants this. And I want to give to him because even if you're not doing it completely l'shma, you're giving to him in order to feel. I used to say that as a good sales guy gives to receive, but it never feels like he's giving to receiving. What does that mean? That means that when you're networking with an attorney and you sell insurance, and you're trying to find ways to make sure that your clients can meet this attorney, not asking him to introduce you to his clients. You're giving to receive, but you're not making it seem like you're giving to receive. And it's not a con artist move, but it's behavior change. It's changing your behavior so that you look to give to people, and in return you're going to give back without ever assuming that's going to be the case. With serving Hashem, we can't assume that. It may not be the highest level, but by connecting ourselves to our source, to the Ar, to the Elokus that we're seeking to have anyways, and giving more power to that, ultimately that Ar that comes back to us is going to be that much brighter and more impactful. Thus, our main focus when we should learn not only about if we understand it or not, because that's not up to us, another place of surrender. How many times do we beat ourselves up when we go to a shiur and we walk out and we're like, I don't understand or know a lick of what that rabbi was talking about? Or a sugya of Gemara that were, a Raisa or Daf Yomi. How many pages of the Gemara have I done in a Raisa that I ultimately have no recollection of? But I know for me that the frequency of doing something every day is helpful. And Gemara has an R that other Torah just doesn't have for whatever reason, but that's for a different time. When our intellect is disconnected from our feelings, the intellect then stands by itself. And it is rooted in the sin of Adam when he desired the Eitz Hadas out of the desire for knowledge. Let me read that again. When our intellect is disconnected from our feelings, the intellect then stands by itself. And it is rooted in the sin of Adam with the desire for knowledge. They say that the neshama is in the brain. I don't think it's by accident that where we have to ultimately course correct ourselves and find our ability to find that inner peace comes from the same place that we have as our mayach, as our place of understanding. We've got this capacity to take what's in here and either live and connect to it and anchor it in the neshama, or we can anchor it in the physicality of our experience. If a person is using his mind and directing it towards Hashem, towards what Hashem wants from him, then his mind is attached to the Creator. This is Dveikus, guys. This is the definition of Dveikus. If a person is using his mind and directing it towards what Hashem wants from him, imagine you had worked on yourself so much that the majority of your day is driven like a dog on a leash to whatever the Eibishter wants from us. But you don't have to be pulled anymore. But you're connected to the Eibishter and being led by the Eibishter. But you know exactly where you're going. You know exactly what it means to do His Avodah. You are truly a soldier of God. And everything else is secondary. How beautiful that would be. But what happens? You get obsessed. I've shown you guys I have a dumb phone. I think I have it even right here. No, I lied. I have a dumb phone. I jump back to the smartphone. I go back to the dumb phone. What's that battle? So I get made fun of all the time because I'm a yo-yo. Baruch Hashem, not in some areas of my ruchnius, but in many times in my ruchnius, it's like I've tried to adopt certain things and they're hard to sustain. It's because of everything we're talking about. Avishai Lev hasn't been able to figure out with this Avodah how to truly disconnect from the physicality of not being available the way I need to be, not having the convenience of a smartphone when I travel. I don't have email on it, I don't have WhatsApp on it. I've been able to curtail it, but I'm back. I'm back to that device, and 7 shiurim ago, I think I talked about not having one, not to flex or tell anyone what to do, or to promise I wouldn't go back. But there's this desperate attempt for that peace. So imagine you're in a world where whatever encounters you end up having, they're being led through the lens of what does the Eibishter want from me. It's like when you're around a gadol. That's all I can compare it to. When you go get a bracha, when you go to, Gedol in Eretz Yisrael, they come to America. You just walk in. There's a different way you're walking. There's a different way you're talking. There's a different way you're pulling out the chair. There's a different way you're sitting down. There's a different way you're getting up. There's a different way that you're, a tone in your voice, a speed of how you talk, the words you use, the mindfulness you have. Why? Because our neshama sense an insane amount of kedusha around us. But meanwhile, we'll go into shul, we'll daven, we'll wait for chazar shashatz, we'll do this move, you're going to cross out this and this, I got to get back to him, whatever, you'll put it back, you'll look at it again, you put it back, you look at it again, you put it back, you look at it again. And that's just one example. But if we can get to a place where we don't worry about getting to the end result because it's fleeting and it's going to take a lifetime, but we can chip away and get to a place where a little bit more of our day is guided by what the Eibishter wants. A little bit more of our day is guided around the fact of if I step forward in this step and I do it in this way, and I do it through the lens of that is what it means to be a Davuk Yid, in payback is that peace and serenity. Now in the beginning, it's like going to the gym. It's going to hurt, but it gets better. Then his mind is attached to the Creator, and such intellect is pure. It becomes a mind that is attached to the Kedusha of the Torah and not just the wisdom of the Torah. The more a person learns Lishma, he's concerned about doing the will of Hashem and not out of personal desire for knowledge. The closer he is to the inner point of the Torah, to the soul of the Torah. We do not mean that we don't have to understand the Torah. We must try to understand it, but we must know that the reason why we learn Torah is only to carry out His will. This is so big and missed in so many different ways within our Yiddishkeit. There's so many guys out there that I talk to that they do think that the main inyan of learning a Gemara is to learn the Gemara. The main inyan to doing Shnai Mikra yeah, you have Hasidim that feel like obviously it's different, right? So they don't have to. Hold on one second. I see Eli Levine's in the lobby now. So you have a situation where you have guys that are focused so heavily on the actual practice, and they think it's the practice in and of itself that is the ultimate checkbox. But the ultimate checkbox is the Vekas. But they were never taught to Vekas. It's a Hasidic concept. It's a Panemius Torah concept. It's not. It's the concept. Attaching ourselves to the will of the Creator through our avoda is the concept. The avoda itself is nothing. But for many, it's become an intellectual stimulated exercise, which is great. And a level, I'm not saying it's not, but I ultimately think that we may be missing in that relationship between our Yiddishkeit and our avoda that, what's the point and where does the fullness come? We need to show Hashem that we're searching for Him. The intellectual aspect in our learning is a garment over our inner mission, and our inner mission needs to be expressed to us through our intellect. The intellectual aspect of our learning is a garment. The teaching of the Gemara is a garment. The avodah of trying to understand the Gemara, because Hashem wants us to, and He's promised that if we do adopt Torah, it will be like gold in our hand, and it'll make it pleasurable. And we have to find which avenue gets us there. It's not a one-size-fits-all. What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gift that we get to have both, the best of both worlds. We get to have the gold, both fiscally, emotionally, and we get to have the serenity and the calmness. Okay, we'll do a few more minutes and we'll stop. If a person hears of a way for how to serve Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he is only searching to uncover his own unique way without a desire to do his will, in simple words, he is serving himself, not Hashem. He is searching for himself. Some people are searching to find themselves in physical pleasure, while others are searching to find Hashem. But you can also have a person who is searching for himself when it comes to spirituality, and his interest is not necessarily finding Hashem. It's an incredibly deep, deep, deep concept. It's an incredibly deep concept. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on over here. It's an incredibly deep concept. So we have to remember that it's not just the avoda of connecting to Hashem in our physical and emotional life. It's making sure that we're connecting to Hashem when we do connect spiritually to Hashem, that we're connecting to Hashem for the sake of connecting to Hashem. It's not just to fix our spiritual condition. Which again, fake it till you make it maybe, but that is the ultimate. This is a dangerous mindset to have. When a person is caught up in physical pursuits, at least he might wake up one day and see that his actions are distancing himself from the Creator. But if a person is immersed in ruchnius all the time and he's merely searching to find himself, he might never realize his entire life, chas v'sholom, that he's really far from the truth. He might imagine all his life that he serves the Creator, while the truth is that he is serving himself. He's only concerned for his own perfection, and he does not yearn to fulfill the will of Hashem. So what can we take away from tonight? What's a practical avodah that we can take away from tonight? Practical avodah for me taking away from tonight is just like I originally set reminders on my phone every 15 minutes to a half an hour to think about the Eibishter. I think I may be able to do the same thing when it comes to thinking about my avodah that has to do for the benefit of the Eibishter, not the benefit of myself. Maybe I can set a reminder a couple days a week where that day is dedicated to just remembering why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because there is no going to be one-size-fits-all model, and it's also not going to be able to be done in a day. But if we can chip away at changing the way we think by setting reminders, people figure out how to diet, people figure out how to get stronger, people figure out how to learn jobs, people figure out how to learn how to do different skills, people figure out how to become doctors. We're going back to school, and it's a school of hard knocks because you're talking about changing our inner selves. But if we can change our inner selves to live for a higher purpose, just like when we do something for somebody else and put ourselves second, third, fourth, or fifth, and we get that feeling of just like, dang, that was great, I got to do something for somebody. We get to feel that all day long if we were to choose to. And this is what I'll leave with, last but not least. In Bilvavi Mishkan Evna's mind, the level of ishtadlus that we do is so impossible to reach what he's talking about, because how can you not be focused on yourself and your physical pleasure? What he's saying in the deepest of way is you got to flip the entire narrative of your life, which again, I'm not endorsing or saying speak to your local rabbi. But your 75% of your day needs to be dedicated to your spirituality and ruchnius, and 25, if that, needs to be dedicated to your gashmis. And I'm not talking about hours of time of work, though that obviously is part of it. I'm talking about where our brain is spending time. And the obvious answer is that we're spending too much time on work. We're spending too much time on physical items when our entire mission here is to get close to Hashem. If our entire mission here is to get close to Hashem, and ultimately the goal at the end of the tunnel is an Olam Haba, potentially the same wealthy guys that are down here aren't going to be the same wealthy guys up there because, they were focused on building wealth down here. And I'm, guilty of that. I haven't found it yet, but I'm working towards that, And so ultimately for me, it's the same thing. It's, what is the chase? And until we figure out a way to chip away at the time through more learning, more opportunity for his baitedus and his baininus, quieting of the mind, finding that peace and quiet within ourselves, we'll continue having the same conversation in 10 and 20 and 30 years from now. So hopefully we can chip away at it a little bit each week. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here. I'm going to stay on the Zoom for whoever wants to stay for the Chayvus HaTalmidim. Otherwise, have a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos.